Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the channel. I'm Brian Lusk. Thanks for joining me today. It's been about a week now. It's been awfully tied up with all the things that have been going on. And let me tell you, glad to be back at the old computer. Unfortunately, it means that there's a lot of stuff that I'm having to catch up and try and actually, well, basically catch up with at this point in time. There is just so much that's gone on over the last, since the last broadcast. So let's go ahead and get rolling right into it. By the way, Al, Jerry, glad to see you both here. Always happy to have you guys here. Let's go ahead and roll on into things and see what we can see is going on for the last while. Now, I am going to do a disclaimer here in that I did have to draw heavily on null reports. They are wonderful resources. Again, if you find that you need to keep up with what's going on when you can't catch a little video from me, then head over to X or Twitter, if you want to call it that, and check out null reports. They have really got the game on. They know what they're doing. And I appreciate everything they do to keep us informed about what's going on over in Ukraine and around the world related to the war. We'll start off talking about Russian aviation. Hi, Lucille. Glad to have you here as well. Just rolled in the door about 30 minutes ago. I got the last few things together so I could do today's broadcast. So it's crazy. It's been a busy one, and it has been a roaster out there, I might add. Very hot and sticky and sweaty. Anyway, talking about sticky and sweaty and problematic, well, Russian aviation has been having a bad week. They've lost multiple helicopters and multiple aircraft and various other things that have been going on. The latest one I've seen at least, was a Mi-8 helicopter that crashed in Donetsk. Now, this situation was very much in flux just 24 hours ago. However, let me see if I've got it here. That Mi-8 was actually downed by a first-person view drone. They had just lifted off when the drone flew in, taking out the multi-million-dollar helicopter with a well-placed strike by a dirt-cheap drone. Congratulations to Ukraine for managing to pull that off. Very effective use of their drones. In addition, the Kursk airport has managed to be struck as well. This was on July 31st, just yesterday. And the Russians were using that area for ammunition storage. More aviation going to have trouble getting their armaments on because the Ukrainians keep taking it out. Now, Saki Airfield, another Su-30M, looked like only 2 were actually destroyed, or damaged, I should say, because they never said destroyed. But a total of 3 Su-30SMs have been affected by the attack on that on July 30th. So there was you can see from the pictures here that there was an attempt to extinguish the fire and move the planes around. You can kind of see the scorch marks and things like that. The various aircraft being destroyed, or I should say damaged, because again, they have not specified that they have been destroyed, indicates that Ukraine has been going after aviation assets like crazy. Now, they did also strike Olynya Airfield, nearly 1,800 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, and that is up in the Arctic Circle, as I understand it. Olynya Airfield from Russia's perspective, a vitally important airfield for their strategic aircraft. And honest to goodness, again, Ukraine is reaching out and touching Russian aircraft wherever they can find them, and wherever they are causing problems for Ukraine, as well as anybody else. Additional reports on the 3 Russian helicopters before the latest Mi-8 that we just talked about. 2 134, a Mi-8, a Ka-226, and another Mi-28 were all taken out in the week from July 21st to the end of the month. So again, effective removal of those from the battlefield without them actually getting into the battlefield. Again, more reports on Olynya here. Keep on going. That Mi-8 got that. And there we go. That is it's not been a good week for Russian aviation. They have really been taking it in the shorts. So overall, that's good news for Ukraine. Now, moving over to Africa for a few moments here. In Mali, a big PMC group was ambushed and killed by Tuaregs. This would not be newsworthy in this circumstance, except for the more I've read about this, the more it looks like the Ukrainians were either advising or even partially staffing these Tuaregs in this attack. The Wagner troops were ambushed and literally wiped out dozens of armored personnel carriers and trucks, and taken out by these Tuaregs in association with, at least as far as I've been able to tell, with Ukrainian special operations personnel. Wherever in the world they are, there will Ukraine be as well, ending Russia's influence in that region in every way they can. Understand that every troop or a piece of equipment that's destroyed in Africa is one less soldier or truck or tank that needs to be destroyed on the battlefields of Ukraine. And it means that Russia's got to either dedicate more resources to those locations to try and keep them staffed, or give up on their influence operations in those areas. Let's talk about Hungary for a bit. And yes, I've had dinner, so I'm not hungry that way. We're talking about the country for a moment or two. And as you'll recall in some of the previous videos, that we've talked about this situation with Hungary and Slovakia, as Ukraine has cut off the tap of Russian oil for them. They've been just absolutely throwing the absolute biggest stink you'd ever hear, yelling at everybody about how Ukraine has betrayed them by cutting off this Russian oil to them. It doesn't matter that they've had well more than 2 years to come up with alternative supplies for oil or other petroleum products. They have been just absolutely beside themselves with anger. In fact, Hungary then announced, well, I should say did not announce, but just quietly did this. They simplified the entry conditions for Russians and Belarusians. That's after Orban's visit to Moscow. Now, here's the thing about that, though. It seems like that wouldn't be a big deal. Let the Russians go and stomp all over Hungary. Nobody cares. Except for one minor detail, and that is that Hungary is part of the Schengen zone. Now, if you're not familiar with the Schengen zone, that is the European Union region that allows for relatively free and speedy travel with minimal paperwork required. As far as I understand, no special passports or anything like that. Easy passage from any of the countries to any of the others that are within the Schengen zone. With Hungary allowing Russians and Belarusians in with simplified entry conditions, quote, quote, that is an easy way for Russia to smuggle in their bad actors to do things like attack the Olympics over in France, attack an ammunition plant over in Sweden or Finland, or any of these things. There have been so many sabotage attempts lately in the European Union that some of them have been tied directly to Russia and others are still under investigation. This is a big security hole that is being manipulated and allowed by Viktor Orban's chumminess with Vladimir Putin. So just really, these guys do not have the best interests of the European Union at heart. Similarly, Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico has threatened the Ukrainian ambassador with the consequences of having halted those oil that was coming from Russia through Ukraine. In fact, they said that Slovnaft will halt diesel fuel supplies to Ukraine, which covers about 1/10 of Ukraine's consumption. I think Ukraine can probably get an alternative source for their diesel. The question is, can Robert Fico get an alternative source for the oil to actually produce that diesel? I'm not convinced that he has the humility to do so. In the end, though, after all the screaming and yelling and all the things that Hungary and Slovakia have been doing, including trying to get the European Union to engage in legal challenges to this action, in the end, the European Union sees no threat to Hungary or Slovakia due to Ukraine's Lukoil sanctions thus far. Guys, pony up the dollars, set up the supply lines, and get yourselves the oil you need from other resources, or you're going to have to deal with not having those resources. That cheap Russian oil comes with a really steep price. Just saying. Hi, Robbie. Glad to have you here, and I am glad to be home. I can't tell you how much more comfortable it is to be able to just sit down, hit the start button, and get things going. So thank you very much. And Al, seems like someone needs to friendly remind Hungary about a few facts. You know what? I'm not convinced Hungary is the problem, per se. I'm convinced that Viktor Orban and his party are the problem. And it's a challenge. We'll just put it that way. They could sure use a few facts to be reminded of. Now, this is going outside of the Ukraine war, just touching on Israel for just a moment or two. If you've been following the news, you'll note that Israel has managed to strike and kill several high-profile Hamas targets I believe, in Iran itself, as well as Hezbollah targets over in Lebanon. And it's really got Iran up in arms. They've actually raised the red flag of revenge on the dome of the Jamkaran Mosque after the assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh. But the thing is that people have been looking at this and comparing it, and yes, Israel and Iran can lob missiles at each other, but they don't share a border. They don't, and the intervening countries don't want them marching through. Therefore, the two can only just spit at each other and hope they hit something important, rather than actually directly engage. And the thing is that Israel has better things to spit with. It has gotten to the point where, with the threat of retaliation by Iran against Israel, Jordan has issued a notice to airmen requiring all flights to the country to carry an additional 45 minutes of fuel for, quote, operational reasons. And this is just so they don't end up having an emergency in the middle of Jordanian airspace, right in the middle of a shooting war, effectively. Now let's talk about the big piece of news. F-16s sighted in Ukraine. Here's the thing, though. I was taken in by this picture, which looked legit. Turns out that this specific picture happens to have been made with Photoshop in about 2022. This is obviously they're being silly with showing F-16s all over the place there. However, that does not mean that F-16s are not flying in Ukraine. In this case, a sighting of an F-16 in the Odesa region. So there's another still picture here that has been claimed to be an F-16 in Ukraine. And over, we're just seeing more reports of F-16s having actually arrived in country. Not just from, random pictures, but actually from Bloomberg News and a few others. The first F-16s from NATO have arrived in Ukraine. The total amount is not known as of this posting. However, it's 6 from a later posting, which I think we've got here. So this is their first shot at F-16s in Ukraine. They've already been equipped with advanced weapons, including air-to-ground munitions, precision guidance kits, and modern air-to-air missiles, according to U.S. officials. Now, null report states likely AIM-120 AMRAAMs. That's possible, especially as I believe the U.S., and this is going from memory here, the U.S. is already working on replacements for the AIM-120. So that's always a possibility. I don't have any proof of that, though. That photo, once again, the Ukraine has received its first 6 F-16s from the Netherlands. This is coming from the Times, and this is there should be more coming from Denmark soon. Then there's this one from the Telegraph. Ukraine has flown its first combat missions with an F-16 after the jet's long-awaited arrival. No reports on what those missions are, but if you've watched the patterns over the last 6 months, you'll recognize that air defenses have been steadily removed from the picture. Anything that can sling defensive missiles at an F-16 or any other aircraft has been systematically destroyed, both in Crimea and in the close areas of Russia. In addition, Ukraine has worked hard to make sure their drones can fly pretty much at will through the airspace of Russia itself. The ground has been plowed, and now it's time to plant some seeds and then work on getting that harvest together. So with a nice plowed ground, they've got the ability to bring the F-16s into a relatively less hostile environment. Good for the F-16s and good for Ukraine, especially when you're starting with only 6. The White House dodged questions on F-16s, stating, "You need to talk to the Ukrainians. I'm certainly not going to talk about weapon capabilities." Of course, that doesn't stop everybody else and their dog talking about those capabilities, as we've seen repeatedly. Even the Russian propagandists are talking about F-16s, with the Western propaganda campaign aimed at pacifying Russian leadership, they say. And they say that with the limited usability of F-16s, they're seethe and cope, as Dmitry states, that Ukraine may have a desire for offensive operations, and that throughout last year, the skies were cleared for F-16s to be effective. Understand that so far, Russia's been the only one able to generally deploy their close air support into the battlefield. Now, Ukraine's made them pay pretty heavily for that privilege. Still, Russia's had more capability to do so overall. With F-16s in the air, they can likely respond more quickly to everything that has been popping up. I mean, it's just amazing how that goes. I don't know what dog you're talking about. Is there some sound playing I don't know about, Lucille? I don't see anything coming through. So this was the 6 fighter planes that were provided by the Netherlands. This will mean this is the start. And would that they could provide 100 at the start. But look at what Ukraine has done with old Soviet hardware and just spit and gumption, trying to make the most of everything they have. They have made things fly, and I don't mean that just by the planes. They have made the most of it all. And that's the real first reports we've seen of F-16s showing up in Ukraine, flown by Ukrainian pilots. So we're really excited about that. We're going to be watching to see if there's more indications of their attacks. Now, moving on to other news related, there has been an exchange of Russian spies and assassins for Western hostages. Oh, yes. Sorry, I forgot what I said halfway through. So thank you, Lucille. Anyway, the amazing thing to me is that Russia takes Joe Randoms, throws them in jail, and then manages to trade their best spies and undercover agents for them. Whereas the West doesn't just hold random Russians. If they're doing something wrong, well, then we'll capture them and we'll hold them. But you don't see Joe Average, person in one of these exchanges coming from the Western side. That exchange actually did get carried out. It happened in Turkey, as I recall. In exchange for 16 Westerners and Russian dissidents, Putin got 8 spies, assassins, and criminals, plus 2 kids of the deep cover spy couple. FSB Colonel Vadim Sokolov was an assassin sentenced to life in prison in Germany. GRU officer Pavel Rupsov, detained in Poland on charges of spying for Russia. Deep cover spy couple Artem and Anna Dulcev and their kids, detained in Slovenia in December 2022 in espionage charges. Roman Seleznev was arrested in the Maldives in 2014. Vadim Konoschenchuk extradited to the U.S. from Estonia on charges of conspiracy to circumvent sanctions, illegal purchases for Russia's defense industry, and financial fraud. Mikhail Mukashin was detained in Norway charged with illegal intelligence and data collection on behalf of Russia. And Vladislav Klushin extradited from Switzerland to the U.S. in December 2021. Charged with insider trading in securities and faces up to 50 years in prison. The people that we received back, however, are journalists and Russian dissidents. These aren't CIA operatives. There's no spies in this batch. Well, okay, maybe there's one. I don't know. I can't state that for absolute certain. But overall, the Russians take these people who often voluntarily come to the country, throw them in prison, hold them hostage in exchange for their nasty people that they want back. Here's that full list here. I'm not going to read the whole thing. You can go through it if you would like to see some of it. In particular, Evan Gershkovich was taken into custody by Russia. He was just a journalist, not a spy. But, you know, that's how it goes. The flights departing from Ankara after today's prisoner swap from multiple countries and Russia. So really, Russia managed to get quite the deal for their spies. Now let's talk about Venezuela for a moment or two. In Venezuela, you would not be thinking, oh, Russia's involved there. Yeah, they are. Now, just to give you the high-level summary of the whole situation there. Maduro, they just had an election. Maduro came out and said, I won. And the election commission said, yes, Maduro won. Well, the opposition leader had people go to all of the, I guess you'd call them precincts or equivalent that Venezuela has, and they got the printouts of the final tallies of each and every one of those precincts. And it turned out that the opposition won by like 60-something%, with Maduro pulling in only 30%. And what the overall, and I'm kind of trying to summarize a whole lot of information I've acquired over the last week, so bear with me here. The thing is that as the results started coming in, Maduro said, hold it, that's clearly not working in my favor here. Cut it off. And so they did. They literally pulled the plug on the website. They declared that there was some kind of external attack and all this kind of stuff, which doesn't require pulling the plug on the website, I might add. They've even tried to go back and correct pictures and videos that showed some of the early results and things like that. And overall, in the end, they basically said, oh, it's clear that Maduro has won, despite the fact that everything before then was showing that the opposition was winning. A stolen election with the receipts to match. Now, Maduro, of course, is a dictator. Dictators like to stay in power. And, well, one of the things he was doing is he was asking Russia for help, which I didn't know about until today. Here are his pictures of Wagner mercenaries working with the Maduro regime to help him remain in power. You can see Wagner patches and things like that on the soldiers. Now, anybody can buy a Wagner patch, but they've been there for years now. In fact, for a while, it looked like the military and the law enforcement might actually overthrow Maduro and help the opposition get in there. However, it appears that overall the situation is stabilized, with Maduro taking direct control of the situation. Now, the opposition leader has now had to go into hiding, and that should tell you exactly how safe it is in Venezuela for people who don't kiss the ring for Maduro. They're not only Russian militants supporting Maduro, but also members of the Cuban military. Both understand on what shaky and especially illegitimate grounds the Maduro regime stands. They will act as the enforcers or commissars of the Venezuelan military. But this takes time, even when being prepared. Russia, Maduro, and other lesser minions know that they can't take the entire population of Venezuela head on. They need the initial protests to fizzle out and then move against them methodically. This is why I emphasize that it is the palaces which the protesters have to storm. Toppling the Maduro regime has only a limited window of time, and it only works when the client dictator gets removed. Time and momentum is of the essence. If this window closes, the oppressive regime will move against them bit by bit, pocket by pocket. This playbook has been only recently used in Belarus. This is a very Russian way of doing things. They're maintaining their control in every way and pulling out every trick in the book, and to try and make sure that their pet dictators stay in charge. which should tell you something. The thirst for freedom runs strong in the human heart. And dictators always have to watch their backs. They always have to look behind them to watch for who's coming with a knife. They can never have a moment's peace for as long as they live. Because in each and every moment, there's the possibility that somebody with that spark of freedom might come for them. Let's go ahead and move on to the news out of Ukraine itself. We got a few things going on. Ukraine has started independently training their M2A2 Bradley crews, so they're no longer having to rely on Western training in order to be able to get their Bradley crews together. Now they're doing it in-house, and as far as I understand, they're doing a really good bang-up job of it. I don't have time to play the video, but let me just copy it real quick and just pop it in there. President Zelensky has been making some commentary recently about trying to come to some kind of a conclusion to the war. Now, understand that he's also recognizing that directly working with Russia is problematic. But as he says, if the whole world wants to see them at the negotiating table, we cannot be against it. Zelensky supported Russia's participation in the peace summit. When asked whether Ukraine was ready to give up territories, however, he replied that this should be decided in a Ukrainian referendum, meaning, are the people of Ukraine willing to give up that territory in exchange for at least a temporary end to the war? And he is not making that call himself. I don't think he feels that he has that right. Everything I've seen has indicated that he is tired, but still marching on. And I would love to hear what the Ukrainian people think about Zelensky these days. Sorry about the kind of gory picture here. Let me move this. There we go. Ilya Ponomarev, who is a former member of Russia's State Duma, cast the sole vote against the annexation of Crimea in 2014, then defected to Ukraine. His home was targeted by a Russian drone in Kyiv. He's the political leader of the Russian Freedom Legion. Interesting that Russia does not forget things easily. We'll put it that way. Sorry, it was a very thirsty day today. I had a lot of working in the heat. Earlier today, Ukraine launched its second modern Ada-class corvette, the Hetman Ivan Vyovsky, in Turkey. The Vyovsky will join its sister ship, the Ukrainian Navy's new flagship, Hetman Ivan Mazeppa, or Mazeppa, I believe is the correct pronunciation, which is currently conducting sea trials. So Ukraine's finally getting a navy once again. These are even new vessels. They're not second-hand equipment. Now, since Turkey's doing the launching here, they might be able to be brought into the Black Sea. I don't know the legal ramifications of that. A more personal story here, not from me, but from Ukraine. A firefighter rescuer of the Ukrainian State Emergency Service kneels over his dead wife, Ina. He was on duty, and already when he was on his way to the call, he realized that Russian bombs had hit his house. His wife was killed, and his 10-year-old son was taken to a Kharkiv hospital with thermal burns. Anna Zamyasova, like her husband, worked in emergency services. I know a bunch of people in law enforcement, in firefighting, in EMS, and every single one of them seems to just have that willingness to sacrifice. That doesn't make it any easier, though. And a heartbreaking way for this man to respond to his own emergency and deal with the fallout therefrom. Moving on, U.S. forces are investigating application of Project Frankenstein. Now, that was kind of the whole Western missiles integrated with Soviet-era launchers and Soviet radars and things like that. That's apparently been really, really successful. So this is something that the U.S. is now looking at perhaps adopting for their own use or for other uses across the world. Interesting to see, and I think it's going to fill a hole in the U.S.'s air defense posture. President Zelensky also reported that the cabinet is preparing to be reshuffled, so expect to see some switching up of the cabinet posts in short order here. We'll see how that turns out. Moving over to the news out of Russia. Let's see, this is on the 30th of July, so situations may have changed over the last 2 days. Kerch and its suburbs are without power after a series of fires at 4 substations. Around 53,000 people are left without electricity and a water supply outage in the city in eastern Crimea. Water's already short, so they have to pump it no matter what. The fact that they don't have electricity in those areas means they can't pump the water, and therefore they don't have the water or the electricity. This was as of 3 days ago. That's not 3, that's 4. 3 days ago. The Russians prepared a massive strike. Now, I don't have much information on that strike handy, but they did carry out a very massive missile attack on Ukraine with a variety of results. You saw some of them from earlier items here, but it looks like Russia's really getting hot under the collar. They're preparing these massive counter strikes, I guess you might say, to try and do something to Ukraine, as Ukraine has been done a steady, regular attacks on Russia's oil infrastructure, Russia's power infrastructure, Russia's airfields, Russia's airplanes, and everything. Russia has been very bad about maintaining their infrastructure during this war. In Karelia in Russia, a dam burst on the Belomorsk-Baltic Canal, leading to flooding in several settlements. This is continuing the pattern we're seeing of Russian infrastructure basically falling apart because they're not investing in that infrastructure. Now, this is, I think, related to the missile strike. The Russians actually deployed 3 submarines at once into the Black Sea, into the Azov and Black Sea regions. That's all they have as far as submarines go. So I believe they were used as part of the major missile strike that was carried out the other day. Ukraine also attacked Russia. This is more power substations on the 30th, with fires breaking out in Belgorod and Oryol regions. Again, this is a constant, while we see kind of this constant nibbling that Russia's doing, investing huge amounts of men and resources and losing much of them to gain a couple of 100 meters here, a couple of 100 meters there. Ukraine is slowly and steadily countering that by destroying a power substation here, an oil refinery there. It's like the two are fighting 2 separate wars that intertwine with each other, where Ukraine is trying to destroy the resources that Russia has to be able to prosecute the war. And Russia is just trying to gobble up as much territory as they can before somebody finally tells them they have to stop. This is the fire from an oil depot in the Kursk region, once again. And Omsk, this actually came out today. This refinery in Omsk was on fire. It broke out in the auxiliary room of the pumping station, but no cause reported as of the last information I had available. The fire did expand to 300 square meters. This is the largest oil refinery in Russia with a capacity of 22 million tons of oil per year and 3,500 employees. Going back to infrastructure for a moment or two, this is not Bakhmut or Avdiivka. This is the Russian city of Vorkuta that looks like it's been bombed. The buildings are collapsing and crumbling. People are literally, thugs are stealing the stairways from in front of buildings. This is a town that has seen no war, except the war of Russian neglect. Now, there is news later on here. We'll be talking about potential Lend-Lease stuff like that and additional aid packages to Ukraine. But Russian propagandists are anticipating this already, saying if suddenly a $500 billion Lend-Lease was created, we may have the need for the practical use of tactical nuclear weapons to strike certain military targets. Now, the wording for the next part is the important piece. And here it is important to prepare an ideological justification for this process. Translation, they don't have one now. They don't have a legitimate one. So they have to make one up so that they can justify the use of nuclear weapons to their own minds. The situation on the front lines has gotten bad enough that there are now Russians paying bribes to leave military service. And this is in a steep rise, with the number of criminal cases for illegal deactivation tripling over the last 5 months. Now, it's not a huge number, as I understand it, but still, this indicates that the interest in not being on the front lines is very much there for those who got the money to be able to pull it off. YouTube is reported as having widespread outages in Russia. Now, they've been talking about doing this for a while. It just seems like they may have jumped ahead of the schedule a bit. But if you're in Russia, if you're trying to get onto YouTube and watch, say, this broadcast, you better have a VPN. And no, I'm not going to do a VPN spot. This is not sponsored by NordVPN or what's the other ones? I mean, there's a bunch of them. I'm just saying, if they're going to have to deal with their own VPN needs. The head of Russia's military supplier company detained as corruption cases mount. Vladimir Pavlov, the head of Russia's military clothing and food supplier, was detained on fraud charges, according to local law enforcement. And this has been the overall problem that Russia has had. In fact, I contend if Russia hadn't had problems with corruption in the early war, they would have been marching in Kyiv within a few weeks. But it was their own corruption, the cheap Chinese tires, the lack of actual care for their equipment, the inability to supply fuel because a lot of that stuff was taken in bribes and graft. I contend that probably we'd be looking at a very different war if Russia had managed to stop this corruption before this military action. From the Defense Intelligence Update, I'm going to skip a bunch of it here and just drop down to the last paragraph. Full-scale war in Ukraine has generated a crackdown on corrupt practices, both in a practical sense to reduce budgetary wastage during a very costly military campaign, but also because political patrons such as former Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu have lost direct influence over procurement processes. While current Defense Minister Andrei Belousov is likely attempting to limit corrupt practices, it is highly unlikely that he will be able or willing to eliminate corruption in Russian defense spending. It's endemic. It's baked into the system. That's how Russians do their work. All right, I'm going to go into international in just a moment here. Absolutely, if you want to chime in, give me some comments, thoughts, questions, absolutely. I will take anything I can get and see if I can get you an answer for before the end of the stream today. So we'll go ahead and go into the international situation here. And I've already talked about a lot of international stuff. It's all crazy things going on. Andrei Danko, the leader of the far-right Slovak National Party and deputy speaker of the Slovak Parliament, announced plans to visit Russia. He stated he received an invitation and aims to emulate Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. He justified his trip by citing Ukraine's recent suspicion of Russian Lukoil oil supplies to Slovakia and Hungary, and attributing the decision to Zelensky's anger. No, that's not anger. That's just trying to stop Russia from getting money. And then he, of course, threatened Ukraine by saying that Slovakia will remember these actions. Now, North Korea apparently has been providing more than just artillery shells. We've had the first sightings of the Bullseye 4, which is a North Korean self-propelled anti-tank missile system. And this is can engage both ground and aerial targets without direct line of sight required. Interesting to say the least. North Korea has been providing a lot more than I expected they would. The U.S., on the other hand, is providing a new $200 million aid package, and the Department of Defense has announced a significant package of support using approximately $1.5 billion in Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative funds. Don't say that 5 times fast. The $200 million aid package includes NASAMS missiles, short and medium-range air defense munitions, RIM-7 missiles for air defense, electronic warfare equipment, HIMARS ammunition, 155 and 105 millimeter artillery rounds, 120 millimeter mortar rounds, precision aerial munitions, which that's a very interesting phrasing. Tube-launched tow missiles. Let's just get by that. Javelin and AT-4 anti-armor systems, small arms, explosives materials and demolition equipment, secure communication systems, commercial satellite imagery services, and spare parts maintenance and support, and sustainment support, and other ancillary equipment. So another good package. Now, China's been trying to play both sides of this situation for quite a while now, and now they're on their latest kick of promising things that I'm not sure they're going to deliver. From September 1st, they say, the Chinese Ministry of Commerce bans the export of any drones that can be used for military purposes. I'm certain that if they thought through that statement, they would realize that all the drones they produce could be used for military purposes. Therefore, I don't believe it. I won't believe it until I see it in proof. The United States has suspended $95 million in aid to the Georgian government over the foreign agent law. That's the one that the Russians have been trying to get in play, and has been passed by the parliament and signed into law by, I think it's the president or whatever that is over there. But now that it's law, the U.S. is saying, nope, we're cutting off the spigots for you guys. I don't know how Georgia's going to respond to that. Be interesting to find out. Now, Ukraine has been aggressively countering Russia in different places. I've already mentioned that earlier. Now they've added the Syrian Quaris air base east of Aleppo, and indicating that there are Ukrainian forces that are working against this base, and they engaged in an attack on the facility here. So again, the Ukrainians are working against Russian forces wherever they are to end their influence in the region and in the world. Moving outside of Ukraine once again, Hezbollah launched a massive rocket launch towards Israel. Now, the whole situation with Hezbollah and Israel right now is very tense because one of their attacks managed to kill, I believe it was 10 or 20 kids on a soccer field playing games. And shortly after that information came out, the Hezbollah stated, oh, no, that wasn't us. No, that was the Israelis did it to themselves. I don't think anybody's buying that particular one. The European Union and the United States are racing to prevent Mideast war after Israeli assassinations. That's right, killing Hezbollah and Hamas leaders. The Israelis have been carrying out a variety of attacks and assassinations, though assassinations with missiles, I'm not sure that's an assassination. Pretty sure that's just called war. But anyway, there's been a lot of crazy concern about what's going on in the Middle East, worried that things are going to become a full-blown war. Speaking of war, let's go to the front lines, and I happen to know I've got this all screwed up, so I've got stuff from all different days all over the place. Bear with me as we jump into it. Good news from the Luhansk region. Ukrainian forces conduct a limited operation near Rahorodka, there we go, pushing back Russians towards Sarhivka. The line of contact has now moved further back towards the Zarabets River. A small bridgehead in this particular area remains. So, good news for Ukraine. They're managing to push some of the Russian forces back. Toretsk, however, the Russians continue to move deeper in, and the new salient that was previously held by Ukrainian forces is now contested and likely to be in Russian control. Klishivka has not really gone well for Ukraine. There's been a lot of back and forth fighting for some time, but at this point in time, it appears that the Russians have primary control over the northern part. The southern part may be under Ukrainian control, but it's not a pretty picture over there in Klishivka. Krasnohorivka shows the Russian forces on the most northern and northwestern parts of town. Likely the city's been taken by the Russians and abandoned by Ukraine after months of fighting. Now, the Ukrainians have been stating that they are not fighting for nothing. They're not going to fight for a destroyed town or anything like that, at least not at this point in time. They fight until there's nothing worth fighting over. Then they pull back, having caused the Russians to invest huge amounts of equipment and personnel in those attacks against fortified defensive positions. South of Konstantinivka, Russian forces are now in new positions and confirming new advances, mainly in open fields. Looks like they're trying to bypass the city from two sides like they did with Novomykhailivka. Krasnohorivka, more geolocated footage showing that likely Ukraine is only north of the Lozova River. Like I said, things are all kind of mixed up right now. New footage shows that Russia has taken full control, quotes, over Zrobotna. That was a big part of the summer offensive. We watched it fall. We've watched it be restored to Ukraine, and now it has fallen yet again. Pretty rough for all that investment in time and resources to have it lost again. Overall, though, the biggest focus is on Pokrovsk. They're only 17 kilometers from the city there. At this rate, that should put them there in about 6 months or so. Estimating. Lots of glide bombs in this area, lots more equipment and troops being invested in this area than anywhere else on the map. And I believe, let me see if I can find it now. Zelensky stated that after Russia's Kharkiv offensive failed, they began concentrating their efforts in the east, throwing everything they have in the Pokrovsk direction, which is why the east side has managed to continue with a pace of operations, whereas Kharkiv has been a steady but slow pushback of Russian forces. Now, of course, War Gonzo gives the Russian perspective on this, generally confirming the things that we've mentioned here. They do state that the Kharkiv area is not quite so positive for the Ukrainians, but it ends up with no significant changes there. From the Ministry of Defense of the UK, in July 2024, Russian ground forces maintained continuous attacks in central Donetsk Oblast. The ground forces made steady advances westward, taking control of several villages and moving closer to the logistics hub of Pokrovsk. They also made advances towards New York, which has been on the front line since 2014, and almost certainly have contested the town between the two sides. It is likely that Russia will continue to make tactical advances in the coming weeks. However, its overall operational capability remains limited by several factors, including a high attrition rate, limited training, and a shortage of officers. That's generally confirmed by the Institute for the Study of War. Russian advances, they state, will likely slow further as Russian forces advance into a line of larger and more urban settlements. That is pretty much everything for today. I don't have any interesting extras, just had so much going on. About the only interesting extra I wanted to kind of just mention real fast. You guys know I left on a business trip a few weeks ago, right before I did, as I was getting into my van. Let me go ahead and pop this up here. This is one of the local stray cats. We call her Tiny Pest. She actually gave birth to a litter of kittens in our house. And while she is welcome in our home, she does not come inside except for every once in a blue moon. But when I was getting ready to leave on my trip, she jumped into my van and explored the van from side to side and front to back as far as she could, and stopped me from leaving right away. It's almost like she knew I was preparing to go, not for my normal day of work, but for a longer trip. And I appreciate all of our cats over here, and I realize that's kind of silly because I appreciate my family even more. But this is the one that greeted me or said goodbye to me right before I left on that trip, and it's kind of extra special to me. And that's everything for today. Thank you for joining me. I'm always glad to have you here. I hope that you found everything interesting. Hopefully, I'll be able to keep up with the latest goings on. Work has been extremely busy, let me tell you. They've authorized overtime the last couple of days, trying to catch up on a backlog of calls. And so I was, even tonight, I had to hustle home and try and get right about 8:30 or so to try and get the last few bits to get you the latest information before I went live here. So I do hope that you appreciate that, and I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you again. You're part of what makes this worth doing. Part of what makes this whole thing worth keeping at it time after time, because I know that you people, all of you wonderful people, will be there to say hello and be part of the stream. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.